Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this morning for our second education session. I'm Kristen Urisic-Scott, and I am your education chair as well as SEPC treasurer. I just want to remind you about the app surveys. If you have not downloaded the SEPC app yet, it is a great resource for throughout this conference. Be sure to use the little more button in the corner and you will see the survey hub so you can give us feedback about the education sessions this morning and other events throughout the show. We would not be able to do any of this without the support of our sponsors. So I want to make sure to thank them. Our Education Session 2 sponsors are Concord Foods and Harvest Sensations. Our Education Session Refreshment Area sponsors are And Now You Know and Despre WP. So I am so excited this morning to introduce our speaker with our What's New research. This is something that has been an initiative of SEPC for a while, for a study that is owned by SEPC and conducted on an annual basis. So I am here to introduce Anne-Marie Roaring. Anne-Marie is the president of 210 Analytics. She works closely with retailers, wholesalers, grower shippers, and trade associations, and has developed an excellent perspective on the ever-changing wants and needs of the produce consumer in a one-size-fits-no-one world. She understands the challenges and opportunities in the food and produce business today, as well as the drivers of success for tomorrow. Let's everybody welcome Anne-Marie Roaring.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're doing handouts with just a couple of takeaways, but the deck will also be available on the SEPC website. And we are also planning a webinar in the future in case you realize that a lot of this information might be applicable to others on the team. So what is this? Well, it is a really, really fun consumer research. For the second year now, we have asked 1,500 consumers anything and everything regarding produce, innovation, technology, because ultimately, we all thought that during the pandemic, it was hard to continue to innovate, whether it was retail or food service or just simply innovations further up in the supply chain, because we were all so busy just keeping stock in store. But in reality, innovation didn't stop. It might have been dialed back a little bit, but we continue to see tremendous innovation. And of course, with all the labor and supply chain issues we're seeing, technology is coming on very, very strong. So what we do in this survey is ultimately, we can dream up anything that we want, but it has to be something that the consumer likes, accepts, uses, whether that's in retail or in food service, or whether it's further up the supply chain. Should it be something that we talk about, or should it be something that we just do in the background? So that's what this survey is all about. So what you see this morning is really all those nationwide numbers, but we also look at two very distinctive groups. So of course we had to look at the generations. You're looking at Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers. That's when you see those little letters on the slides that are to come. But we also looked at what we call low, medium, and high frequency shoppers. Sometimes we call those light, medium, and heavy shoppers. So what that is groups of consumers who buy fresh produce at a much higher rate. They consume on most days of the week. They buy across more different items, and they buy across more different channels. And that's how we can see a little bit of a blueprint as to why are those high frequency produce consumers different, and what can we learn from them? Because the long and the short of it is that despite everything that we are doing as an industry and all the programs that are out there to promote the consumption of produce, whether it's fresh, frozen, or canned, in reality, we continue to see that a lot of consumers are still not eating, by their own admission, the recommended amount of produce. 12% said, I don't even know what the recommended amount of produce is, so there is a big opportunity for us. And then you have just 12% who said, yeah, you know what, most days I do get to that recommended amount. On the other hand, 6% said, no, I don't get to the recommended amount ever. In other words, there is a huge runway ahead of us in terms of figuring out how we can best get that produce on the plate. And we also ask consumers, well, where do you think you fall short? That's when you see dinner do fairly well. That is the lowest percentage. But as you can see, a lot of consumers recognize that when they eat their breakfast, their lunch, and their snacks, they've realized that those are opportunities for them to eat more produce, to get more produce into their diets. So that already is a big clue, whether you sit on the food service or the retail side. So what we're going to do is you see everywhere across the hotel and across everything where the conference is taking place is this little 4-leaf clover. And that's really what this program is all about. We try to ask consumers questions in every single one of these areas. We're going to start with on the menu, give some love to the food service folks in the room, and at the same time we also know that there is a lot of change happening in that area, so we want to make sure that we understand that interaction that is taking place right now between retail and food service as dollars just continue to move back and forth. So yes, absolutely, what we're seeing is this insane height of inflation, 40-year high, is influencing where people are spending their dollars. I was talking in the back of the room a little bit earlier, and even though we tend to look at inflation year over year or even month over month, what we're seeing in produce is that year over year, prices are up 10, 12, 15%. However, if you look at prices across all food and beverages versus 2019, so versus the pre-pandemic, you're looking at 26%. I don't think any one of us have had a 26% increase in our salaries, in our wages since 2019, and that is true for most people in the US. So there just simply is tremendous pressure on income, and one of the first things that people do when that happens is pull back on their restaurant spending. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We see more than 4 in 10 people say, I try to eat out less. Doesn't mean they are not engaging with food service. In fact, in a typical month, you see 80, 85% still engaging with restaurants. They just tend to be a little bit more strategic about it. You also see that this is a big opportunity for the retail side in the room today, because 57% of consumers say that they want to recreate those restaurant meals at home. And that, of course, really emphasizes that premiumization that we have seen since the start of the pandemic. We don't see premium do quite as well as we saw in that first year, but we continue to see that shift between ultra value and premium in the exact basket, and that has everything to do with bringing that restaurant meal at home. If we look at the NPD data, which measures the number of trips, they are seeing the exact same thing. They also see a lot of pressure on the different meal occasions. So then we asked our survey respondents, well, when do you tend to engage with restaurants? And as you can see, it's a little bit of everything relative to breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the beverage and snack. The biggest occasion remains dinner. And the one really that is a little bit under pressure is lunch. Lunch has been the one that has moved back and forth the most for the simple reason that we got so many more people working from home still than we did prior to the pandemic, which means a lot of times that particular lunch occasion continues to sit at home. And because there's so much time pressure on lunch, a lot of people just end up eating that meal at home. And you see some retailers and even restaurants go after that lunch occasion very hard. If you look on the meat side, for instance, Hormel hired a position that they call the lunch whisperer, and that person comes up with very quick and easy recipes for that lunchtime occasion. And here you see some examples of people saying, you know what, that beverage moment, let's try to not just sell coffee, but try those other items with it. So a great coffee deserves some great food. Many of the retailers have coffee programs in your store. Think about tying some of that in with it. And then the one on the top right, that is one of my favorites that I've seen in a while. This is a retailer that has a big coffee program, but at the same time, they are trying to sell breakfast and lunch at the same time for about $10. So really saying, if you're in my store, if you're in my restaurant for one meal, why don't you go ahead and buy 2 meals? And that, of course, is something that a lot of the meal kits are trying to do as well, where you buy the meal, but you also buy enough to have leftovers for the next day. Then there's a retailer in England, Sainsbury, that realizes that there is a lot of opportunity for produce in breakfast. They have one of those little food trucks themselves, and it's not out during lunch and dinner, but it's actually out during breakfast to get people to eat more produce during that breakfast occasion. So some great ideas out of the marketplace. The other thing that we're seeing is, in addition to that pullback on the number of meal occasions at restaurants, is the orders are changing as well. We laid these results against what Data Central is seeing relative to where operators continue to innovate. Operators are really pulling back their innovation dollars into the main meal, and that makes all the sense in the world when you look at how consumers are changing what they're ordering. They are trying to find cheaper items on the menu. I would argue that that is good for us because produce-forward meals tend to be a little bit less expensive than meat or seafood-forward meals. You see people looking to just buy that main meal and skipping desserts and appetizers, or buying at a cheaper restaurant altogether. But you see much fewer people actually saying, I'm going to skip the add-on, like a side salad or a side of mushrooms on the steak. So I would say a lot of the measures that people are taking are keeping produce front and center in those meal occasions when they are at restaurants. So then, of course, we had to ask the consumers, while we had them, what can we do to help boost that produce consumption when you're ordering meals at the restaurant? Free trip to the salad bar. You know, whenever you say the word free, of course, you get a lot of uptake on that. So 71% said, yeah, it would be wonderful to order a meal and have that free trip to the salad bar. Some restaurants do that extremely well. But at the same time, you also see that some of the big trends that have been driving sales in retail are also panning out in this question. If you think about how well those beverage-based, the produce-based beverages have done, look at the number 2, featuring drinks and smoothies that feature fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's driving really big gains in retail, and it has 65% of people interested for food service as well. The other thing that we're seeing is a big interest in having fruit as an appetizer, maybe a side of fruit instead of a side of vegetables. So I think this gives restaurants a lot of flexibility to think about some different menu line items, maybe depending on what is available in the marketplace. But certainly there is a big opportunity to play around with produce in many different ways. Now, you remember those high frequency or the heavy buyers, the 3 apples there, and as you can see, they really are the ones that are very interested in including more produce in every which way they can. And you see higher interest for all these different types of solutions that we came up with relative to buying more produce when you're at restaurants. So desired information, this one was really interesting because if you think about retail, we tend to have the package, we have the walls, we do a lot of education in store. But many restaurants don't have that opportunity because there's only so much room on the menu. But we do actually see that the interest levels in these kinds of information is very, very similar to the numbers that we see in retail. And we saw that throughout. So we do have an opportunity there to also talk about items that are in season, items that are locally sourced, maybe talk a little bit more about the nutrition. And again, that's where I believe produce can absolutely shine compared to some of the other items on the menu. Then we, of course, had to ask about local sourcing because on the retail side, in season and local tend to be the hottest attributes out there right now. So what we saw is that about 51% said, you know, local is more important, even if it costs a little bit more, even if it might affect the produce in one way or another. But we see that number be much higher among older shoppers. We see that in retail too. Among boomers, local sourcing, taking care of the community, keeping the dollar in the community tends to be much more important, not just in produce, but in meat and dairy and everything else as well. For Gen Z, for millennials who have grown up in a much more global world, you see that that focus is much more about, you know what, even if it's sourced abroad, that's fine as long as the cost and quality is keeping my meal affordable. So there's a little bit less of a focus on local, both in retail and in restaurants. But I absolutely think that there's a lot of interplay between retail highlighting that whole idea of provenance and where did it come from, and you're really seeing some restaurants running off with that as well. Here you see 2 examples by Chipotle and by, I think it's Panera, talking about it's better for the planet, it's better for the people, and where does this all come from, really telling that story very, very well. So we'll see a little bit later on, that QR code was almost gone, but it has come back with a vengeance, and it really allows us, in whatever channel you are in, to tell more about the story. I was just talking to a lady who was talking about having visited their farm in Peru and how little these people know about it. This is really our opportunity to educate the American consumer in any which way that we can. And we're going to talk a lot about that here in a little bit. Then we were curious about what the consumer had to say about produce menuing. We all know that there's the powerhouses of tomatoes, lettuce, potatoes, all the same ones that are huge in the retail channel as well. But we were curious whether or not people would like to see a little bit more unique items, or if they were just looking for nothing too fancy, as we called it in the survey. And the market is pretty split. It is 54 versus 46%. You do see a little bit more interest among younger shoppers, and that makes all the sense in the world. If you look at where the younger shoppers eat, if you look at the types of meals that they're into, they are much more into the adventurous cuisines, into small plates, trying new and different things. So depending on where you sit in food service, or as you think through your lineup in retail as well, this idea of introducing some of the less common vegetables and fruits can be a really fun way to engage and to differentiate. Then, of course, we had to ask about fresh versus frozen and canned, even though at the end of the day it is all vegetables and fruits that matter. But you do see that fresh has a tremendous perceptual advantage among shoppers. 72% believe that restaurants should be sourcing fresh fruit and vegetables, and even though frozen and canned might have that advantage in cost and waste. Fairly similar numbers, but still that fresh is a bigger advantage to your boomer, your older shopper, but still that is really something to build out. But at the same time, of course, we all know that like consumers, restaurants too are playing with that interaction between frozen and having less waste, having more flexibility, but absolutely fresh remains a big advantage perceptually. So, of course, we talked about technology a lot this morning, and every single session we also had to ask about technology when we had the ear of the consumer. QR codes, as I mentioned earlier, if you think back to the early weeks and months of the pandemics, as restaurants opened back up, the waiter had to stand there and tell you what to do with the QR code. These days, we walk into a restaurant, we all know what to do. We whip out our phone and we start interacting with the menu on our phone. And as you can see, the uptake on that is quite high. Only 6% say, I don't know what you're talking about the menu QR codes. At the same time, and we're going to have some robots hobbling around the show later on this afternoon, we see that having a robot bringing out dinner to the table, that's not quite something that we're excited about. 26% say, I could not imagine that or could not stand the idea. And then, of course, there's a lot of unawareness of that as well. The bottom line of all of this is that as it relates to technology, and we're going to see this in every single one of the 4 sections, is there is a big difference in generations relative to technology uptake. And that's where we have to look at who owns the majority dollar. So if you think about retail and you think about $100 spent on groceries, about 33 of them are still spent by the boomer generation. About $30 out of the 100 are spent by Gen X. Then you go down to millennials and it's about 20, 25, depending on the category. And then Gen Z is very, very small, between 1% and 3% of most categories. So that means that Gen X and boomers, who are much less likely to accept a lot of this technology, are not necessarily excited about a lot of these inventions, but at the same time, they are the majority spenders. Now, if we flip that around and we look at the future dollar and we look at where is the growth, as you can imagine, the boomer dollar is getting smaller and smaller, and the millennial and Gen Z dollars are getting bigger and bigger. So when we look towards the future, the acceptance there does indicate that we have a lot of leeway to continue to innovate and use this kind of technology, because as we all know, the labor issues are such that we have to figure out how to rely on technology a little bit more to get our meals ordered and our meals to the table. So that concludes the first set. So let's look at the second one, being at the farm. Here we had a lot of fun to figure out what do people want to know about, the virtual visits or interest in new varieties, hydroponic growing, a lot of the topics that you talked about this morning in the first session. So our first thing was asking consumers about technology at the farm. 74% said, you know what, I've never really heard a retailer or a brand talk about technology at the farm, not really something I hear about or think about. But 36% would like to learn more, and a lot of those are clustered in those younger generations. But all in all, the idea of using technology on the farm is not necessarily a slam dunk. There was 25% of consumers said, yeah, I don't know, I don't like this whole idea of robots picking my harvest and AI and all of that good stuff, because that is what creates that factory farm. But at the same time, 38% says, great, they should use all the technology there is in order to optimize productivity. So again, we see that little bit of a different reactions to technology, which means we have an opportunity to educate, but we also have to make mindful of the idea that not everybody likes this idea, and we don't want to come across as that factory farm that tends to be held against us. But there is huge interest in the virtual visits to the farm. We all know it's not easy to get out to a farm, and the idea of being able to just learn a little bit more about it has been very attractive, and especially among those younger generations. They're visiting a virtual greenhouse or visiting the farm and field, they're virtually the same, right around 4 and 10 people, but when you look at the younger generations, it goes to half or a little bit more than half. So the beauty of today's world is that there doesn't need to be a $50,000 produced videos. Here's an example of Shay doing a tremendous job putting very, very short TikTok videos together, educating consumers about everything that they want to know about. I'll just play one.
The watermelon is about 14 pounds, at least from our field, and every single watermelon that you buy at the grocery store has gone through at least 10 sets of hands. This is only the harvesting side. These guys over here are doing the picking. They're the ones that pick the good ones from the bad ones, and these guys are tossing them on the truck. That's why your produce, regardless of the country of origin, requires lots of labor. This is happening in Parma, Idaho. Now, what do these guys make? That's a question I'm inevitably gonna get, so let's address it right now. These guys are making $17.50 an hour. Their housing is provided. They have a 401k match. They have health care, and they come here seasonally for usually 7, 8, up to 9 months at a time. They're on the H-2A, the agricultural visa program. Now you know why, how your watermelon are touched so many times, why produce can be so expensive, and all the work that it takes. Thanks for letting me share. Next time you have a watermelon, now you know who's doing it. See ya.
So I know I talk fast, but you know, he's got me beat, that's all I know. But some great information, very easy to produce, and tremendous uptake from the consumer as a way to bring the farm closer. And really it is all about learning more about the how. People want to know about where was it grown, by whom, what have you. And again, we see very little difference between the produce that people buy in the store and the produce that they order in restaurants. Store is a little bit higher, 55% is interested versus 42%, but at the end of the day, we really have an opportunity to talk about sourcing, about where it comes from, what else you can do with it in both channels. And as you can see, some good examples here of both channels. The bottom one is a restaurant in the Netherlands where I was over the summer, where it just showed where the main items on their menu came from in our itty-bitty postage stamp size country. But we still have, I think, a really fun way to talk about sourcing and to talk a little bit more about the how, the what, the where, and the when in the store. And that really is driving something else that we're seeing, which is that whole idea of on-premise growing, whether it's a store or a restaurant. We had the herb walls and the lettuce walls. We had growth containers in the parking lot. We see these mushroom mini farms. This is an example from Central Market. And as you can see, again, quite high interest, both for retailers and restaurants, simply to learn a little bit more, especially people with children are really liking the idea of being able to see something grow. So something to keep in mind. And again, it is about not just the how, but it is also about the who and the where, and especially in retail, people want to know any which way. Now, what we're going to see throughout the presentation is a ton of demand to put stuff on the label. At the end of the day, we all know there's only so much real estate on the label, so we're gonna have to prioritize. But if it's up to the consumer, they would learn a lot about the portion size, as we'll see here in a minute, the information on the package label relative to the where, who, and what the produce came from. But we also really have that opportunity with other items, be it the website or the app, be it signage in the store, maybe something you can rotate every single month, as well as, of course, that QR code. At 32%, it is not the highest thing that is out there, but I went back to some older studies that we did, and at the time, the QR code was exactly at 8% of people being interested in using it. So if we think about just in a couple of years how that has come back, I think we really have a big opportunity to leverage the QR code to extend that real estate that we have on the label. Then, of course, we had to ask about new varieties. After all, this is the survey about innovation and new things. So we said if a farmer, if a grower had the opportunity to come up with some new varieties that you could buy in a grocery store, what is your interest? 54% thought that that was a great idea, whether it was a new flavor size, mixed variety, what have you. And you see that high interest among younger consumers, which is what we always see across retail menus as well. These young consumers love to experiment with different cuisines, different flavors, textures, and what have you. But now also look at that light, medium, and heavy buyer. 65%, and these are shoppers that already include fresh produce into their baskets at a much higher rate. 65% of them is interested in new varieties, and that, I think, is our biggest marching orders to continue to innovate in the store and in the restaurant, because that heavy shopper, where always most of the growth comes from, they want to continue to see new items. So what kind of innovation would they like to see? Well, mixed variety sounds real fun. And I realize we can't always mix everything, but think too about cut fruit and veg, where we have the opportunity to bring together some new and innovative flavors, and maybe some safe fruit and veggies that people are used to, but also integrate some of the new ones. New sizes generated a very nice 55% interest. And of course, when walking around in Europe, I saw a lot of portion-focused innovations out there, so the very, very small cauliflowers, items that can be completely eaten, like the one below. And then, of course, new types, whether that's something that's completely uncommon in this country or something new altogether. Items that link to food waste, like the example on your bottom right, and new flavors, every single one of them. So this really gives us a ton of permissibility, whether this is truly us putting something together or new seed and hybridization, whatever that word is, technology. We have a lot of opportunity, I think, to bring new to the store. So then we went a step further, because we all know when you walk through center store, you see the fortification throughout many, many different articles, right? It's always added protein, added nutrients, whatever it is, more calcium, what have you. So we said, you know what if we were to play around and we could deliver you a bell pepper with extra vitamin C, or berries that stay fresh longer, or a cucumber that stays good for 2 weeks in your refrigerator. Well, there's a good number, 27%, who go, oh, no, that is way too sci-fi. No, don't do that. But if you look on the other side, you have 46% who go, this is kind of interesting. So I could eat 1 orange, but have the nutrients of 2 oranges. Yeah, that works for me. So I think, again, this might not be an easy thing to do in terms of seed technology, but it does give us some permissibility to really talk a whole lot more about that delivery, much like center store does, much, much better than we do. And we're going to see a lot of numbers on that here in a minute that are quite staggering. But before we do that, let's look at For the Planet. That's, of course, a section where we've talked about quite a bit. In the beginning of the pandemic, we all figured people are focused on immunity, they're going to be focused on keeping food on the plate, cooking a whole lot more. Where is that going to leave sustainability? Well, in all reality, the definition of sustainability only widened, and it really moved from environmental sustainability to a much wider definition to also include things like taking care of the community, taking care of the worker, better for me, better for the planet. So it really ended up being an area that only grew during the early years of the pandemic rather than slid back. So starting with the issue of waste, we hear a lot about that, and if we look at other areas of this globe, we see a lot of focus on food waste, especially in Europe. And it is a bit of a problem according to our respondents. So especially on the fruit side, 46% said it's somewhat or a big issue, fruit going bad before they could eat it. Vegetables going bad before they could eat them, about 44%. Then, of course, as we are moving towards a world where there is more packaged items, 37% said, you know what, I have to buy these packaged items in such a quantity that then I have too much and I ended up throwing it away, or there's items that never ripen. So that's where a lot of the technology comes in. We've seen a lot of innovations like Hazel that keep that prime ripeness for a longer period of time, not just for the retailer, but also for the consumer at home. And that's where I think we're going to see a lot of innovation move. But we also see within retail a lot more signage. Here's some examples of different ones that talk about perfectly ripe right now, or this is how you pick a ripe watermelon. I love that signage, and a lot of consumers stand there and immediately start to apply those different tips. So I think we have a big opportunity here. Being in Europe over the summer, this was really fun. We walked around and I realized that they have a ton of innovation relative to package size. So that whole idea of when things are packaged, there's a lot of 1- and 2-person households out there. There's communities, if you think about Manhattan and those types of areas, where more than half of the population is a single or dual household. So that means having to buy these big salad kits, or even if you think about the lunch occasions. So this is what Europe is doing. Of course, I had to recalculate what all that meant, but 150 grams is about a cup. So it's a little bit hard to see, but on the top shelf, you see that 1 cup size package of Brussels sprouts. Right below it, you see the 400 grams, which would be more of your family size package. And they do that with a lot of the cut and fruit veg. You also see these tiny little bags of salad, just 250 grams, 1 to 2 cups, which is the perfect amount for lunch. So they're really focusing on managing that food waste, but also doing the mix and match promotions to still get people to buy a little bit more and bring that variety. Here you see great examples of that, where people buy the cut fruit and it's all mix and match, this many for $5 type of ordeal. You see tiny little corn lollipops. I thought that was a hilarious item. And then, of course, all the meal kits. You see tons and tons of produce-driven meal kits that then take those portions down to where they make the exact meal without having a lot of the food waste. So how about that shelf technology? Well, there's growing interest. We asked that question last year. We asked it a couple of years ago. 46% now says, great. Anything that safely prevents items from going bad after I buy them, I am all for it. And there's still 41% said, that sounds really good, but I want to learn a little bit more about it. Their hesitations tend to be the impact on food safety, the impact on taste. So those are the kinds of things we have to keep in mind as we think about technology, really in all sense of the word, right? And we, of course, have always food safety in mind. We always have taste in mind, but this is something to talk about with the consumer as we bring these kinds of technologies, because at the end of the day, the one thing that will always get the repurchase is a fantastic tasting product. And that is something we always have to keep in mind. So how about sustainability? I mentioned it earlier. Sustainability matters to a lot of people. As you can see, the no purchase influence, whether we're talking about food waste or giving back to the community, packaging waste, it's for the most part less than 20% of the population who said, I don't care about it. But at the same time, the number of people who say more likely to purchase sits at 50% or higher. So this is an opportunity, and here's an example of a brand that really incorporates that into their core message.
This is how consumers connect with thanks.
Mi sueño es poder adquirir una heladera nueva para tener una mejor calidad de vida para mí y para mi familia. Gracias por cumplir mi sueño. Thanks.
So there, of course, are brands that are very much integrating that sustainability message in the widest sense of the word into the brand. But at the same time, of course, many of us conventional brands have a hard time doing that. So where does sustainability sit? Because it's an easy thing to say, oh, it's important to me. But where does it sit relative to price? And I think this is actually one of the most important slides in the entire presentation. And regardless of the sustainability message, look at last year's number and look at this year's number for price. It is astounding to see that people have given a little bit on quality and freshness, and there is an enormous uptick in the importance of price in that purchase decision. And that is exactly what we are seeing in all the numbers, where more people are going to value-based formats, more people are buying items that are a little bit riper, a little bit better priced at farmers markets, at roadside stands, and what have you. But back to the sustainability thing, as you can see, at the end of the day, quality and freshness is more important, price is more important, but it still matters to quite a few people. I mentioned earlier, too, that there is that who spends today and who spends tomorrow. Well, if we look at sustainability in that lens, you see that 35% of Gen Z believes sustainability is very important versus 23% of millennials versus just 10 of boomers. So again, if we think about, is sustainability driving dollars today? The answer is in most categories. You see organic, non-GMO, what have you, be in niche areas. But if you look at that shopper of the future who will be spending the most dollars in both retail and food service, it is going to matter a whole lot more. Now this one hurts a little bit. Of course, we had to ask, are you seeing brands, retailers, restaurants talk about taking care of food waste, the planet, the community? And for the most part, you see that most areas are either none or a few, whereas in reality, I bet when we go out to the show floor here in a little bit, every single one of the brands, you are doing something to give back to the community, to take care of food waste, to limit your package waste, everything. But the consumers aren't hearing it. And so I think we do have an opportunity there to do good, but to also create a positive sentiment and to really interact with consumers on all the things that we are doing in a more overt way. The credit for grocery stores is not any different. As you can see here, there are still 7 in 10 consumers who believe that just a few retailers have made commitments to food and package waste, whereas in reality, I think every single retailer here presented in the room today is doing something in those areas. So you see some best ways to share here. Yet again, a lot of focus on the package label, whereas we all know, again, real estate is limited there, but leverage all the things that you have, whether that is the brand website, the retail website, the QR code, and figuring out little by little how to integrate that. The things that you're doing in doing good, we'll call it for short, to really integrate that in a way where consumers, to whom it is important, are really seeing all our efforts as well. So a little bit more storytelling. Here you see some examples, whether it's on the napkins in your Deli Prepare program, whether it's on your signage, making people feel good about the meals that they have ordered. Or here's Aldi, just simply talking on whenever they have an empty end cap, talking a little bit about the different things that they're doing, the number of pounds that they've given to people in need, the pounds that they have donated. You see a lot of focus too, especially in Europe, on that idea of fewer plastic sleeves, fewer stickers, getting rid of the little plastic bags over there, laser engraved in terms of the PLUs, and a lot of certification programs are starting to pop up as well. And then a lot of focus, too, on simply limiting food waste in the store. If you know me well, you know that my one favorite vegetable in the whole wild world is Belgian endive. I can't ever find it here in the US, but it's a big vegetable in the Netherlands where I am from. And as you can see there, whether or not this contraption actually works or not, but only half of the product is out in the light, and the other half is behind this little bin with the lid, and it sits there until it's moved forward. Whether it works or not, it is a great visual for the consumer to see that the store is thinking about keeping the product fresh. The picture in the middle is a German retailer that has, much like when you go to the restroom in an airport or in a restaurant, you often see this little chart that talks about when it was last cleaned, it's signed, it has a date on it and a time on it. Well, that's exactly what they're doing for their produce department. They are saying we guarantee the freshest assortment because we do regular quality checks. The last check, and it's a little chalkboard, at 3:25 p.m. More than likely, all the retailers in the room, you do quality checks anyway, so why not take credit for it and give consumers that idea that you're really looking out for them in terms of the quality and the freshness. And then in England, you see a big focus on the idea of why do we have best buy and sell by dates on things like apples, onions, items that have a very long shelf life. And so their program is actually best of British apples by Sainsbury, no best before date, to avoid food waste. That's right on the package so that people start to realize that, hey, I can be my own judge about when the apples should be eaten by. Last but not least, in this section, there is absolutely a big belief about produce and health, and that is something I think that is inherent. If you just go to Google or any search engine and you type in healthy, the images that come up are always fresh produce. And I think we have an opportunity to leverage that a little bit better. We also asked about that whole next frontier, if you will, the idea of produce prescriptions. Especially some of the retailers have been playing around with this. We know that there are some incentives where people will get prescribed produce and the retailers get a little bit of an incentive from the government for that. The interest in that is very high because of that inherent link between fresh produce and health. All right, last section. This is a really fun one in the store. So we're going to look at all sorts of different areas relative to fresh produce as well as technology. So first of all, as inflation is extremely high, we continue to see that dollar really distributed even wider than it was before. We continue to see a big, of course, channel being the conventional supermarket. We see huge uptake. Nearly 60% of the population buys fresh produce at a Walmart or Target, what we would typically call a supercenter. Then you see 35% at Costco, Sam's Club, or BJ's. What this chart is saying is that during a time where we don't necessarily have a ton of inventory, people are buying produce in more channels than they have before. So the big learning of that is that being distributed correctly is even more important than it ever was before. Making sure that your inventory is in the places where your key customer is at, so as little goes to waste and as much effectiveness that we can have is important in a market like this. But we do continue to see a very high number for farmers markets, for roadside stands, and of course a lot of the dollar is leaking into that drugstore, convenience store, etc. as well. Really, everybody has started to realize that power of produce. Online shopping continues to be mostly omni-channel instead of the sole channel. So what we're seeing is that depending on the month, if we see a lot of new COVID cases, online tends to come back a little bit. But for the most part, about 50–60%, depending again on the month, buy some produce or some groceries online. But where we see the big change is really not in whether you are shopping online or you aren't, but it is in the frequency of how often people are shopping. We see more people now buy weekly or every 2 weeks, whereas the old average prior to the pandemic was more of a 3–4 week kind of cadence. So we see higher numbers there in addition to fresh ending up in that basket a little bit more often. We see a lot of focus on delivery and pickup equally, really. Younger generations love delivery. They're not leaving their house a whole lot, and same for restaurant meals, actually. The younger people are driving that delivery. But there's still a lot of growth opportunity. My big message here is we do such a good job merchandising in the store. Many of us forget to merchandise online. Still have solutions and information there as well, other suggestions to buy, really give descriptions other than the UPC or other than the word lettuce, so keep that in mind there as well. So in terms of the channels, here are the numbers that are behind it, and unfortunately there is a red column there that represents the actual traditional grocery stores, and I made sure to include all the different departments because what we are seeing is an overall shift of consumers from that traditional grocery store that tends to work with a high-low pricing model towards models that are just simply known for better value overall. So you see big growth in mass and supercenter, the Walmarts and Targets of this world, especially Walmart. You see a lot of growth in club across different departments. And if you listen to the news, we've all heard announcement after announcement that Costco has more memberships now than they've had in a long time, that Walmart had an extremely good second quarter, and that is exactly playing out in these numbers, in addition, of course, to that growth in online that is mostly driven by frequency and basket size as well. But we had to probe further, because we all think about the competition for produce in frozen, canned, and fresh. Well, in reality, what we found out is that our competition set is much wider than our traditional view of competition. So we asked about whether people do things like those squeeze pouches that used to be for babies but apparently now are for everybody, whether you eat the supplements, whether you do the produce-based beverages, all these different things. And as you can see, the numbers across the population are quite high, but when you go to those younger generations, they are incredibly high, especially for things like supplements, the squeeze pouches, etc. So this in and of itself is really a big eye-opener to there are people that believe their produce dollars go much wider than our department alone. So we asked about this idea of plant-based. Do you buy plant-based meat alternatives, milk, veggie-infused pasta, what have you? And as you can see, there is quite a large number, 75% of the population, that partakes in this plant-based something at least some of the time. So if you look at the example I have over here, you need to eat 4 chicken nuggets to get a 1/4 cup of veggies. And I'm not dissing on this product at all. There's a lot of parents who love integrating the hidden veggies, as we call it. But realistically, to get to 1 cup of vegetables in this product, you would need to eat 16 chicken nuggets. If you think about the fact that you would need 4 or 5 cups of vegetables, you would basically need to eat 50 or 60 chicken nuggets. So in reality, it doesn't really work. Yet, when you walk across Center Store, they are all touting produce, 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 and the benefits. Some are actual dry produce, like those cauliflower bites. And look at that box of the Barilla veggie-infused rotini. If you look at that picture, it seems like there's actual pieces of basil and tomato right in that box. Well, there isn't. It doesn't look like that when you pour it out. If you look at a lot of the beverages, the powders, all the beautiful vegetables and fruits are on the front. Here's a video that, frankly, they've been spending tons and tons of money out in the marketplace. It's infuriating, but apparently it works.
Many doctors and specialists recommend eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables because they are scientifically proven to provide your body with numerous benefits. Inside each fruit and vegetable are thousands of nutrients known as phytochemicals. They help to keep your cells strong and healthy. For years, scientists have isolated certain phytochemicals, creating artificial vitamins. But phytochemicals need to work together, and isolating them can have harmful effects. Only by eating whole fruits and vegetables can you get all the phytochemicals working together in harmony. At Balance of Nature, we understand this. That is why we use whole, natural produce in our products, providing your body with all the nutrition it needs on a daily basis.
So they basically start off with saying, forget all those vitamin gummies that you eat. They don't work. You have to eat whole produce. Oh, but by the way, we have the solution for that. So whether it is or not, of course, we had to figure out, do these things impact whether or not people believe they need to come to our produce department to get to their recommended amount of produce? Well, guess what? Only 18% of the population believe that these types of items, whether it's beverages or plant-based meat alternatives or these supplements or the squeeze pouches, do not contribute to getting to your recommended amount. That means that 82% of the consumers believe it absolutely helps to get to that amount. So I've gone through this on the meat side for quite a number of years. For years, I kept telling the meat guys, you need to put protein on the package. Now, in part, the government wouldn't let us for a long time, but they also said, we're the protein department. Everybody knows we're the protein department. So of course we had to go out, and this is a big lesson that we can learn from meat. Here's a video where we ask consumers, what is the better source of protein, peanut butter or chicken?
I've heard peanut butter.
Chicken? Peanut butter.
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter.
Chicken.
I would say chicken.
Chicken?
I would say chicken. I want to say chicken.
Chicken?
Peanut butter.
Chicken.
I'm thinking chicken.
Oh, chicken, because I eat a lot of chicken.
Chicken.
I would say peanut butter.
I would say chicken. That's a lot of sugar.
It's a lot of sugar. You know, and that is such a big lesson, because if we think about all these plant-based items and plant-forward eating, many of them mimic that's a lot of sugar, right? We really are that beautiful delivery of the nutrients. So learn from the meat department and talk about our products the way a lot of those center store products are doing. Portion size, I think, is a big one of that. We saw very, very early on that there's a lot of consumers who have no idea how much they're even supposed to eat or don't get anywhere remotely to it, so perhaps talking about that a little bit more would help. There's 50% of the population, and the numbers are very, very stable across the different generations, and especially those higher shoppers want to know more about portion size. So if you look in the Netherlands, for instance, all throughout the store, you see the Dutch system. I know we had the 5 a day for a while. That's what England is still using. In the Netherlands, it is 250 grams of vegetables and 2 pieces of fruit. You see that all throughout the store, whether you are in the produce department or not. Or you see here in Australia, where on different packages, it shows what portion of, in this case, mushrooms make up that 1 veg a day kind of thing. They still have that 5 a day as well. So here, personalized nutrition, that's another next frontier, I would say. We see some interest in that as well, not as high as some of the other areas where we have seen. Of course, this might be one of those areas where it's a little bit harder for consumers to wrap their brain around it, but certainly this can be an area too where we continue to bring back that power of fresh produce and the overall idea of we're competing with many others. So where else would you like to see besides that portion guidance? Yet again, a lot of information that we somehow need to squeeze on that package label. We'll have to ask Kristen Yarisic about some new ideas here. But as you can see, it's not just about the who, what, where, and when. It's also about nutrition, about specific health benefits, about the origin, all these different things. But I do think we have an opportunity to leverage information in different ways. As more dollars are moving online, we have a fantastic opportunity to link to more information online. We have signage in the store. If you see here that sweet potato signage, what a fun one just to teach people a little bit more about it, or just having different programs that cut across the entire store that bring this information out to different areas as well. A lot of innovation in this area. I always love walking the show floor and seeing these different things, but we do have opportunity to really leverage that on-pack information, the signage, the websites, and by the way, I always love getting pictures, so if you have good examples, please send them over. So on the flip side of all of this, of course, is that 40-year high inflation, and absolutely people are looking for what is on sale, and we see huge focus on checking produce promotions, whether that is at the primary store or across stores. But what we are seeing in produce and different departments is that we don't have the ability to promote the way we were prior to the pandemic. Promotions across the entire store are down, as in there are fewer than there were before, and what is being promoted tends to be promoted at a higher price than we saw before. But yet there is a big focus among consumers as a sort of a first resort to saving money and figuring out to make their budget work in 40-year high inflation. So how do they look? Where do they look? Well, we continue to see a lot of focus on that in-store signage. If we go 10, 15 years back, it was all about the printed circular. That one, as you can see, is now down to number 4 and 5. So the app has become way more important. Signage has become way more important. The beauty of that is more flexibility. So we're seeing a lot of more flexible items out in the marketplace, or just one-day promotions, a couple of hours, a couple of days, mix and match promotions. And that is really, I think, one of the major things that we can continue to do to bring those promotions that people are looking for. Here's me walking up to Hy-Vee, where right in the, and there's hubby butting in, there is, right as you walk up, QR codes everywhere. Whether you walk into the store, you're grabbing your thing, you can just hold up your phone to it, and right off the bat, you see all these different items roll through that you can then add to your cart to get the discount. So we really see a lot of focus on innovative promotions. If you think about a restaurant meal, you don't look at what the produce component was relative to the entire meal. It's really positioned as a total cost. So here is Wegmans taking the total cost of a meal and saying, you know what, if you have all these different items together, you're sitting at a little over $3 per serving. So all of a sudden, that basket feels a little bit better. Mix and match promotions, I showed those earlier, but really a big focus on digital as well. It's becoming harder and harder to have those printed circulars out in the marketplace. There just aren't as many newspapers out there anymore. So really getting people to subscribe to the app, to digital lists, to emails, even texts right now are moving up very, very quickly. Within all of that, we have a huge opportunity for personalization. Coborn's was nice enough to share these numbers with us, and as you can see, when you're able to have targeted promotions that matter most to the consumer rather than having them do the work, you see tremendous open rates of close to 14% versus that 1 or 2% barrier that we're typically moving against. So the idea of personalized coupons, personalized, reshuffled digital ads really, really worked. So remind people of new consumption occasions. That is always a big one that we talk about. At the end of the day, there's a much bigger barrier to buying something that you haven't had before than figuring out a new consumption occasion with something that you know you like. It's called, in research geekiness, it's called cognitive distance. The closer something is to something I'm already doing, the more likely people are to do that. So here you see a great example of just a display in a public store near me using a QR code, and it automatically takes you from just maybe eating a peach straight as a little snack to having all sorts of different things that you can do with the peaches. It tells you a little bit about the origin. It gives you all sorts of different recipes. And that really is not a whole lot of shelf space to put that little QR code right on there, again, to bring those new consumption occasions. Because at the end of the day, what we are seeing is routine meals are out. When I first asked this question, probably 15 years ago, we saw that routine meals were about 70% of all the meals that people create. Now routine meals are the number 3 at 38%, and it's really about just that digital integration more than anything. Here are some of the videos there. Where do you get your inspiration?
I usually will Google something, look it up on the internet. I have several cookbooks at home, but I think this day and age, the internet is just a lot easier to find exactly what you're looking for, answer quickly.
Usually I'll just Google, you know, we just made a pork tenderloin the other day and we were looking for a new recipe. So I would, you know, Google pork tenderloin recipes. And of course, you know, 5,000 different recipes come up. And I would say that, you know, the one that has the number of positive reviews, the highest number of positive reviews is usually the one I go to.
In terms of inspiration, I do all of my menu planning on Pinterest, and there might be a trend on Instagram or TikTok that I'm seeing that I might want to scope out.
I would say the other place, if I'm trying something like totally new, it's really looking on, like Googling and looking on a website and scrolling down to find just any like easy recipe. Usually I'm searching for something like easy, healthy recipe because I'm not a good cook, to be honest. And so I actually like really do rely on very specific instructions.
I follow a few food sites on Instagram, Smitten Kitchen, Food 52, New York Times Cooking, and occasionally they'll post a recipe that looks phenomenal.
Food Network, Cooks Illustrated,
Instagram, there's a couple people I follow that I trust.
Martha Stewart, the Pioneer Woman.
Yeah, I mean, I look online, there's not like any particular, but we watch a lot of like cooking shows. And my cousin runs something called International Kids Plate, which is a Facebook social media group where her and her kids cook food from different countries. So we follow them and we'll try some of the recipes that they've tried.
So we see that there is a lot of inspiration, and most of it, as we saw, is online. So our job really as an industry is to close that gap between online inspiration and purchase. 46% of consumers, this was up from last year, is looking for shoppable recipes. And as you can see, the more people are online, the more they love that idea. Here's an example from Fresh Market that does just that. The minute you go to their website, it starts with the shoppable recipes and meal inspiration that you can then buy. They put out a press release. This really, really works. Everybody that is doing it really, really likes this idea. So last but not least, a lot of technology coming into the store. The big message there is whether we look at fruit vending machines, drone delivery, robot delivery, you name it, and we're going to see some fun ones on the floor this afternoon. There is a big generational gap. So keep that in mind as we start to integrate these types of solutions, of course, to deal with our labor issues. So key takeaways: inflation is real, consumers are adjusting, but at the same time, it is not a race to the bottom. We have an opportunity to help with consumers getting more produce on the plate, Produce for Better Health. All sorts of organizations are really, really focused on that. And I think as an industry, we really have the opportunity to work together on this very important goal. Labor and cost savings, we have to look to technology, but also keep in mind the consumer acceptance side of that. We have a lot of opportunity to educate the consumer. Educate, it's not a word I like a whole lot, but talk to consumers about all they do, because they are curious about where we're coming from. If I were a betting girl, I would say portion size and amounts are going to be much more important going forward. That might be a way to get more fresh produce into those smaller households. And more than anything, our competition set is so much wider than frozen and canned as well. It goes way out there, and that, I think, is our biggest marching orders, to talk about the delivery of nutrients, the unique importance of fresh produce in the diet. So that concludes my presentation. I put my email up here. Find me on LinkedIn. I always love hearing from you guys, getting photos from all over the world. And Kristen, I believe that the presentation will be up on the website. Is that correct?
I believe so. It should be on the garden, if anything, so we'll follow up with all attendees on that. Let's give Anne Marie a round of applause. So, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Up next, also, if you have a chance, please fill out your survey on the app. We appreciate your feedback to continue making these education sessions better as we move forward in the future. Up next is our general session and keynote luncheon right down the hall, so we look forward to seeing you guys there.